It's a great honour to be invited to give the Bradfield Oration, an event that has become a major fixture on the annual calendar of our state. And watching that video before Ben's address and seeing Lucy Turnbull launching the 3 cities plan a few years ago and then Dom trumping it with his 6 cities plan a few years later, I wanted to scoop the pool and announce 12 cities today, but I won't. I've resisted the urge. But in all seriousness, the address is an opportunity to lay out the plans and ideas for a great city and to do it in front of influential leaders in our civic life. In the past, this address has been a platform to debate infrastructure, roads, urban growth, planning, public transport, taxes, as well as the intangible characteristics of a city. They're difficult to identify, things like culture and experience and the temperament of a city. All of those contributions, sometimes at odds with one another, have been used to lay out competing visions about what's possible, what to avoid, and what we're collectively missing out on in this beautiful city. I've noticed in the past that keynote speakers and some panellists at this address have been split in the past into 2 groups: those who are in government and are responsible for the executive leadership of the state or the country, and those who aren't, but are looking in from the outside. The outsiders are far freer to offer advice and ideas without price tags attached, without any real regard for timelines or already commenced projects or contracts or budgets. And I should know, because that's exactly what I did last year as Leader of the Opposition. But all contributions rest on a really simple premise, and that is that this is a great city filled with wonderful people who were either born here or moved here to make a better life for themselves and their families. And it's the greatest city on earth. Wherever you end up with your designs or plans for Sydney's future, you start with a city that's bordered on the east with world-class city beaches. On the west, north and south, by some of the most pristine and awe-inspiring national parks in the world, and a city that's intersected by 3 beautiful rivers that cut through the urban landscape, offering, in the process, water access to literally millions of people. It's possible in Sydney to catch a wave at Maroubra, Cronulla or Manly before getting to work on a Friday morning. It also means wherever you live in Sydney, in all but one direction, and that's east, you can travel 40 minutes and be in complete isolation in the middle of the natural beauty of a pristine national park. And in the middle of it all is a deep harbour where a 30-storey cruise ship can pull up next to a 70-storey tower and then gently slip back into the spillway and then back out into the ocean. So in spite of my recent public support for the Brisbane Broncos in the NRL Grand Final, I can assure you that I, like you, absolutely love this city. Friends, who are we up against in competition with this city? Melbourne? What can Melbourne genuinely offer? It seems to be, if you listen to Melburnians, a mix of, quote, check out our coffee lanes and some kind of Parisian feel, except that it doesn't have the Louvre, it doesn't have Haussmann architecture, it doesn't have Bonaparte boulevards, it doesn't have the Musée d'Orsay, it doesn't have the Eiffel Tower. In other words, it's Paris without any of Paris's landmarks, but with Paris's alleyways. However, when it comes to Sydney, all of that natural beauty creates natural limits to our vision for this town. Those national parks on all sides mean that we're hemmed in when it comes to growth. The rivers cut through Sydney like a scythe, and the city beaches coastline means that the eastern approach to the city doesn't really exist. So unlike a lot of cities around the world who are big metropolises, it's not possible for us to have ring roads with multiple access points to our downtown. The second and perhaps equally important problem is that because of its natural beauty, I think there's a temptation to treat it like a masterpiece. Let it hang in a museum untouched. A precious artefact that's just too delicate to mess with. After all, you wouldn't add an extra ab to Michelangelo's David, and you wouldn't add another lily pad to a Monet masterpiece. But treating Sydney like a delicate object risks robbing its future. It's akin to leaving it on an art gallery wall, simply gathering dust. It's a living thing, this city, and just as Bradfield's Harbour Bridge or Utzon's Opera House were additions to the city that ultimately made it even more attractive, we can't be afraid to make change that will add and not subtract from its beauty. In short, we've got to have the confidence to make change in our city. I believe that change must include, at its heart, new housing and density for the people who live here. Housing is the key to ensure that young Australians have the ability to live and write the next chapter of Sydney's future. If we fail to do that, then we won't be providing the next generation with the chance to grab a piece of Sydney for themselves, which many in this room, including me, were able to inherit or grab for themselves. When I was young and graduating from high school, the key question my friends and I asked each other upon graduation was, will we ever be able to afford to buy a house in Sydney? The question for many these days is, will I even be able to afford to rent a place here? It was at this speech last year, in the run-up to the New South Wales election in March, where my party was able to clearly state that development had slowed to a crawl in Australia's largest city, and that the maze of planning agencies, bureaucracies and departments were hampering New South Wales' competitiveness and also its ability to attract and retain capital in our state. I was given the opportunity in opposition to make that case alongside then Premier Dominic Perrottet. And can I take the opportunity to congratulate Ben English for discontinuing the practice of inviting the Leader of the Opposition to these addresses. No need to do it, Ben, no need to do it. This forum was an opportunity to firmly say supply, or in this case a lack of supply, was the leading reason for the housing affordability disaster in New South Wales, and that something needed to be done about it. Supply is fundamentally being hampered by excessive delays in processing development applications. Currently, local councils on average take 111 days to process a development application. Across councils this number varies, so Blacktown has got it down to 10 weeks to process an application, while Woollahra and Georges River Council, it's currently over 200 days. That Bradfield debate and the subsequent election campaign around the need and for the supply of housing went a long way in skewering the list of what I call red herrings, often prosecuted by NIMBYs, anti-development mayors and others who hope to draw our attention away and hopefully frustrate attempts to build more opportunities for building in Sydney. But the truth is, there's just no shortcuts to a growing city. I know, having appeared at this forum as Leader of the Opposition, that it is a lot easier calling for these changes rather than actually delivering them from government. Consequently, I, rather than Dominic Perrottet, who I think is here today, am now on the hook to get development and completions going in this state. Last year, New South Wales had 48,000 housing completions in a 12-month period. Now, you put that against Victoria, that managed to achieve 59,000 in the same period of time. New South Wales produces 6 houses per 1,000 people every 12 months. Victoria produces 8, and Queensland a massive 9 houses per 1,000 people every single year. So that means that despite having the largest population, the largest expected increase in population, the highest rents, the highest median house prices, we are last on the East Coast when it comes to housing completions. Our departments, our councils, some state MPs are saying no too often when it comes to new housing options for Sydney. But every time they say no, it means that another house will not be built for a young family, a single person, or a renter in our city. For some assessors, no is the safest answer you can give. After all, no one's ever been fired for rejecting a development application. In other circumstances, applicants and builders are being asked to repeatedly fund independent reports on shadowing or traffic management that is well over and above what was originally required for the development application. That culture has to change. And I know that the Minister for Planning, who's here today, is determined to change that culture. I want to say, Paul and I, as a starting point, the New South Wales Government will hold ourselves to be totally transparent about how we're meeting this challenge. The Government will publish housing approval times or delays for every state significant development, every single one of them. We'll also centralise and publish the average number of days it takes for all councils to turn around a development application and make that easily readable for the Daily Telegraph and other media organisations. We'll publish housing completions in comparison to other states, a form of league table, so the citizens of New South Wales can track completions across borders and compare it to New South Wales. This will ensure that the public are aware of the progress that councils and the New South Wales Government are making when it comes to our goal of increased housing supply and cutting red tape. But perhaps more importantly, the Government will be aware that the community is also watching. I want this question to weigh on the shoulders of my ministers and senior public servants and senior mayors, and that is, will I say no to this development knowing that it will mean one less house for a young family to call Sydney home? In the coming period, the Government will publish plans for new housing zones that will allow greater uplift for infill development near major train stations and public transport hubs. These new housing zones will allow for greater height and more housing, and they'll be strategically located to allow Sydney to grow. However, not all of the housing required in New South Wales will come about as a result of high-rise or new housing estates on Sydney's fringe. There was once a thriving development that was oriented in the middle ring of suburbs, allowing more housing without the need for skyscrapers or traffic problems on local streets. These were classic Sydney terraces and 3- and 4-storey unit apartment blocks. They're also commonly referred as the missing middle of housing development. These projects, once common, have effectively been defined out of existence by years of planning and zoning restrictions from local mayors and councillors. And this is a fact. Only 2 of 32 local environment plans across Sydney currently allow for terraces and 2-storey unit blocks in areas zoned for low-density residential. 2 out of 32. Now, this type of building is essential if we're going to meet our housing targets, and it's been essential in the past in spurring development and allowing many first home buyers to purchase their very first property. It's also a great building option for small-scale builders to jump from working on freestanding residential houses to greater density dwellings without taking on the complexity and onerous nature of a big, tall residential tower. Now, the Building Commissioner, David Chandler, tells me we're desperate for this tier of developer to enter the market and start completing constructions. Of course, David's work over the past few years in the New South Wales building industry has been tireless and thorough, and the Government will continue to support him and his team as the state constructs the housing required to confront the crisis. But in order to get terraces and low-rise apartment blocks into the system sooner, I can announce today that the Government will launch a pattern book development pathway for terraces and mid-level apartment buildings. Working with industry, the Government architect will develop several template building designs. If a builder builds to the pattern book, then the development will be considered complying development and it'll be given an immediate tick. The pattern book, the standard design, will offer ease of approval, ease of construction. It will limit bespoke drafting or architectural plans, and it will mean cheaper component parts as manufacturers will supply specs to the book, knowing that there's a market that's already been created by the creation of this pattern book. We must ensure that the pattern that we choose, however, is beautiful, modern, and eventually beloved by Sydney-siders wherever they're built. And we also want to bring the community along. So with that in mind, I can also announce today that the government will launch an international design competition for a budding young architect to design Sydney's new terraces and Sydney's new apartment blocks. We want Australia and the world's best young architects to put in a nomination to show us your creativity and ideas for a structure our city will fall in love with. When Premier Joe Cahill launched his competition for the design of the Sydney Opera House, he charged £10 for registration. And I haven't told the Treasurer this, but we've waived the fee for all inbound competition entries. But in all seriousness, this is your chance to design not just a single building, but fundamentally change the city. For a young architect, it's literally a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The winning designs will be part of the pattern book. For Sydney, it's an opportunity to pick a design that we can shape around our city. Rather than boring uniformity, this will allow builders to pick the standard design they know is attractive, they know is great for the market, and they can get going with almost immediately. While we're going to engage pattern book designs for both mid-rise apartment buildings and new terraces, when it comes to high-rise in well-located sites best suited for greater density, the government is going to provide developers with options. We've listened to feedback that site-specific competitions for every development is adding more than a year to the planning of any large DA. Instead, developers of high-rise will be able to select an architect from a pre-approved list from the government architect. This will turn off the need for architect competitions on every single development, and we believe slash approval times by up to 12 months. I don't know who's clapping, but that's great. So, it's not Ben, he's only got one hand, so. If we see in the new high-rise developments the design quality we're seeking, we'll consider this for all high-rise developments. I'll have more to say about these sites in the near future, but I want these kinds of measures to be my government's hallmark in addressing the housing crisis, slashing approval times and costs to get great results for the people of the state.